Let's revisit the drop gears and our setup here on our friend Nick's 1380 is what this likely is. It's one of these cases where you acquire someone else's project and the engine was built some time ago, maybe a couple of years, maybe as many as 10 years, by the previous owner, who then sort of threw in the towel on the project and someone else gets it. You're looking at something that isn't really a known quantity. This was built by a shop, apparently a machine shop in the San Jose area, San Francisco Bay Area, and a pretty penny was charged for the machine work and assembly. So it was not a particularly inexpensive setup. I can see a windage tray was installed in here. It has these total aftermarket, very serious looking main caps all the way across, including a 4-bolt center. So some really high-end machining. But when people aren't mini experts, this setup here is a mystery to people. We took it apart and found that in fact the idler arrangement was locked up. It was right up against the housing, too much shim. And interestingly, this was faced off a little bit. This was probably slightly damaged, and it was machined off. You can see there's no little collar area and oil area that they usually have. No big deal. It just rides against a thrust washer. It looks like a nice job was done, and so as a result, they added an extra thick thrust washer in here, I think a 137. So when I went to take it apart after we couldn't get this thing to fire up, and we had a number of problems with it, this was one of them. This was tight. This was up against the housings. No damage. The engine didn't run. So we've taken about 6 or 7 thousandths out of it. I figured it had about a 2 or 3 thousandths interference. I'm shooting for somewhere 3 to 5. Again, we can't get in here with a feeler gauge and measure, but I put a variety of shims into it and ended up pretty happy with the setup that we'll have here. We'll have about 4 thousandths would be my estimation. Just about what we ended up with up here, 3 or 4 thousandths. At first, when I took it apart, I thought, there's one thing that felt pretty good. It looks like a brand new primary gear, brand new bushing, so a very nice fit on the crank. But it had a pretty worn out thrust washer in here, measuring about 112.5. I put one in that's probably about 117, giving us just about 3 thousandths here, a measurable number. We can just kind of barely perceptible click there, and really a very nice drop set. We should be looking good as we put this back together. We'll address a couple of other things on the other side. The timing cover is off. We're going to tone this down a little bit. Nick is not looking to drag race this or beat anybody into submission. We're going to tone it down with 1.3 standard forged rocker arms, and we'll build a shaft. I'm just not a real fan of these roller tip 1.5s. And what's interesting here, I always advise people not to go crazy trying to get these tips right over the valves, but somebody did here, and I'm very concerned about pushrod contact. You have to live with a little bit of off-centerness to these roller tips, in my opinion. When you add a shim, like look in here, it's difficult for this old camera to focus, but a great big shim in here has this arm quite a ways away from its pedestal. There's an astonishing amount of flex if you were to see these running, and I would like to see these arms right up against the pedestals whenever possible. I don't really stress over these tips being perfectly centered. A nice job was done here. They're about as centered as you're going to see, especially on one of these aluminum heads. But we prefer the standard set for standard street performance. Nick's hoping to take this thing to events as far away as Yellowstone here from our Northern California location. So we're going to take the steps to make it a nice bulletproof street engine, not a high-strung thing that's likely to snap a rocker arm if you push it wrong. So as we put this back together, we're hoping to test fire it here the next day or so, and kind of clean up the Cooper Road Mini garage again. As we can see, a project like this usually gets disassembled as needed and put where needed, and we always look forward to getting them back together again. All right, a little visit and an update from Cooper Road Mini.